Well, hello everybody, and welcome back to the channel, and welcome back to a special project that I've had in the works for a little bit, since being able to clear up sub-requests for a little bit. So, as I've hinted at before, I've always said that the starter packs in War Thunder, they're not particularly great. Some of them are alright, like the US, the Russian pack used to be pretty good, it's not anymore. The French pack, again, used to be pretty good, but nowadays they need changes, and well, that's why I thought I'd do this little proposal video as I usually do. So before we begin, as per usual, any images used to showcase these vehicles are not owned by me. Additionally, there are going to be timestamps in the description available because this is going to be a bit of a longer video. You can also skip ahead to the starter pack that you specifically want. I'm not going to judge you for it, but still. Additionally, this idea is proposed to be as easy for Gaijin to implement, so vehicles will try to avoid being entirely unique due to this. Special thanks to Blue Gold, aka Elsa Cogna, for help with the project. Finally, before we begin, if you wish to use this on the forums to make a forum post, please do so, as long as credit to me and this video is given. So why a presentation rather than separate videos? Trust me, it's the easiest way. That, and I love doing timestamps. I do it enough for the Pokemon channel as it is. Every nation apart from Israel, because Israel doesn't have one, could improve something about their starter pack. Whether it's the tank that's bad, the plane that is bad, or both. And I'm just going to let you think about that Stairs at Italian starter pack one there. So as mentioned at the beginning, there are timestamps should you wish to jump ahead to a specific pack you want to see upgraded. Also, Gaijin would be too lazy to watch 8 different videos on proposals, so I'd rather bulk it into one. Plus, you can just skip ahead to whatever you want to see, and I'll still be there, because obviously I'm commentating the whole bloody video on my own. But you get my point. And I know Cogna will probably skip ahead to Italy knowing him, because he'll want to see what tank I've paired, because I did spoil the plane for him. I also spoiled the German part on the Discord server, and surprisingly, I nearly spoiled Russia's tank, but then I remembered that Gaijin don't do, captured vehicles as part of a starter pack, because obviously, in the case of something like China, they didn't really have anything, so that will be explained in the rules in a second. But thankfully, I was able to find something that was a bit more suitable for the Russians. So as per usual, there are requirements and or rules here. So, the vehicle proposed must be something that is still unique to the tree to an extent, whether that be a prototype of a production vehicle that we have in-game, a variant we don't have, etc. This is just to ensure Gaijin has no excuse to be lazy. If the gun and the vehicle, if the vehicle itself can be literally made in a couple of minutes by Gaijin, they've got no excuse. Number 2, vehicles must be domestically produced where possible, except China, because, as I said earlier, China didn't exactly make much. Sweden also partially applies here due to lack of production for domestic aircraft. Obviously, they did have stuff, like the J-22s and stuff, and the J-21s later down the line. But obviously, they're technically post-war aircraft. The J-21s are, the J-22s aren't. But you get my point. The point is that they're not the biggest producers of domestic aircraft, at least until after the war. Because obviously, a lot of Sweden's aircraft in the game, in the early tiers, are not Swedish. And the ones that aren't very good, and plus they're not suitable for this requirement, as you'll see with Rule 3. Number 3, all nations must have a CAS aircraft suitable for the starter packs. Can be a prototype. No fighters will be used in my proposals, as a new player can unlock fighters early on. All aircraft proposed will try to have a rear gunner where possible. Strike aircraft based off of fighters are allowed. So that is essentially because rear gunners on aircraft are very useful for a new player to have. And obviously with a starter pack, you want them to have some sort of fighting chance against defending themselves. Obviously the only one that comes to mind, off the top of my head anyway, that has this, is the German starter packs. They've got the Stuka. And, well, don't worry, that's not really changing much. There is technically still a Stuka, but you'll see as we get to Germany. And like I said, strike aircraft based off of fighters are allowed, but no fighters will be there. So you'll see why that applies later. And obviously, as I said, no fighters will be used in my proposals. Excuse me, because, well, fighters can be earned early on. They don't really need a starter pack to give them a fighter like half the packs do. And well, some of those packs don't give them ones with bombs, so, you know. And then, of course, rule number 4. Most importantly, consider fun factor. Will these vehicles be fun for a new player? Will they be effective at their role? These are what I considered before selecting them. So it's time to start off with the first pack, and that is the US, because, well, I'm doing it in nation order, so don't judge me. If you've just jumped ahead to the US starter pack, welcome aboard. Here are the vehicles I'm proposing. So, obviously, as per usual, I leave on the left-hand side the replacement tank and the aircraft, of course, but also a battle rating that I think would suit them. So, obviously, you know, there's not a huge amount of option when it comes to US, because they have a lot as it is. And, well, I thought, well, the M3A3 is a perfect reasoning. And, obviously, I've left on the left-hand side as well, reasoning. So, like, it's my sort of, like, you know, like, version of, you know, why I think this would be a good vehicle. So, obviously, the replacement tank is the M3A3 Stuart, which we all know this tank's very good. It's in the French tree, it's in the Chinese tree. It's pretty dang good. Reasoning. It adds the M3A3 to the US tech tree, meaning they can add a tech tree variant too. The M3A3 also has a better lineup than the M3A1 US Marine Corps one for grinding and would be a rank 2 premium, which also means scouting. There's not many vehicles in these proposals that scout, and well, this is one of them. Then for the replacement aircraft, we have the Douglas A24 Banshee. Now this may look pretty familiar to you. That's because this is a army variant of the SBD Dauntless. Now, the Gaijin could go spicy and add in an SBD5 if they wanted to do that and just rename it the A24 Banshee. But no, I wanted to add this because, you know, it's an army variant. And, well, I know Sikogna pointed it out, but the reason why it's in army green there is because you could have an unlockable skin for the silver. Which, as you already know, I do love silver on US aircraft and most aircraft in general. But obviously, a battle rate of 2.0, obviously, it would be able to provide effective casks, because obviously it has 1,600 pounds of bombs in some cases. Obviously, your most common bomb load will be a 1,000 pounder underneath the fuselage and then a couple of 100 pounders on the wings. But, you know, there's a lot of unique factor to this plane because, well, I say unique factor. It's unique enough to the point that it is slightly different from a regular SBD. Obviously, there's no tail hook, there's no additional strengthening in the tail. You know, it's a little bit lighter, should be a bit more nimble. And, you know, I believe this could still carry the gun pods as well. So if you wanted to go fighter mode with this thing, you could. But at the same time, like I said, it's still got the bomb trapeze, it's still got the 100 pounders under the wings, it's still got the cheese grater dive brakes, you know, it's still a Dauntless at heart, it's just a slightly different name. And, you know, like, it still has the twin 30s in the back as well, so, you know, it's still effective CAS. And obviously, as we know, the SBDs are relatively maneuverable, so even at 2.7, which is an up tier for it, it would still be able to handle itself quite comfortably. Obviously, against 3.7 aircraft, it would start to struggle, but of course, unlike the P-36 Hawk, which is part of the reasoning, this is not only a dive bomber, but it also has twice the 50 cals of the Hawk at the cost of agility. And they can add it to the tree as well, because, well, Gaijin love adding stuff that they literally can do in 2 minutes. So, again, accommodating for Gaijin's usual laziness. Now then, Germany, and I'm sure every single person who's watching this video is a closet German main, because you're going to love this one. So starting off with the tank, we have the Panzer III, well, the Panzerbefehlswagen 3 Ausführung K. Now this is a command variant, and I know it's a model, for example, on the image there. I couldn't really, the only image I found of a Panzer IIIK was one that was on its side and it had been knocked out, so you couldn't see the front part of it, which there is a difference, as you'll notice as you look at the machine gun port there. It don't exist. Pretty much it doesn't have it. Obviously this is pretty much based off of Panzer IIIL. Obviously there is evidence to suggest it may be an M, but you know, the M actually had the gun shield additional armor. This one doesn't, so I'm going to assume it's an L with just Schützen added. So, reasoning, it's another Panzer III, which I'm sure we'll all appreciate, because I do like the Panzer III. It has a minor difference with no MG port, and it's much more forgiving than the SDKFC 140/1, given the nerfs to the penetration that vehicle received. And it slots in well to most German lineups of those BRs, you know. Because like I said, the German 3.3 lineup is pretty dang solid. So you have two Panzer IVs. You can obviously play the Panzer 3M, and then you could play this. Obviously, you'd want a bit more variance than that, but you get my point. The point is that this is something that you'd want to see. Obviously, it still has smoke grenades, as you can see on the top of the turret there. Obviously, the shirts inside armor can obviously help. It's got the high hardness rolled armor on the front. It's got the extra track links on the front as well, so the transmission's a bit more protected. You know, it's still a Panzer III, but at the same time, it's something still somewhat unique. And like I said, the whole point was to try and be as easy for Gaijin to implement while still trying to be unique. And that was kind of my reasoning with the Panzerbefehlswagen 3 Ausführung K, because, you know, it's easy for them to implement. They have the chassis, they just need to modify the 3D model a little bit to take out the MG port. As far as I've been able to work out from, like, researching and stuff, the dude in the machine gun port was still there. It's just he was more of a radio operator now. Because obviously the whole point of a Befehlswagen is it's a command tank, so it has additional radios and antennas. So, as far as I've been able to work out, it's still a fire crew vehicle. As for the replacement aircraft, we have the Ju-87D4, battle rating 2.3. Again, slight up tier, but, well, Stuka pilots don't really care, do they? They just kamikaze the first thing that they do. But, you know, it's still a Stuka at heart. So, the reasoning for this aircraft is it's a rank 2 Stuka. So not only it grinds the tree better than the R2 Libya, it can also be used in naval, because this is such a navalized Ju-87. Well, I say navalized. It can carry a torpedo. And it also carries the same bomb loads as a standard D-Series 2. Similar flight model to the D3 Stuka 2, so it's pretty forgiving. It's durable, it can take a hit, it's got great rear machine guns for dealing with aircraft. Its front guns are a bit poor, but from what I've read, this thing could still carry the gun pods, the machine gun pods. Couldn't find anything on the cannon pods, but I would imagine if it could carry the machine gun pods, you know, it could carry the cannon pods. So even though it's stuck by 792s by default, remember this would come as a premium, so you know it kind of makes up for that by having access to those cannons. Now, I think personally, if you was to give it the cannons, you would have to stick this at much higher BR. The only reason why I'm sticking it at 2.3 is because from what I've read, it's actually heavier than the D3, because obviously the additional strengthening for the torpedo and stuff like that. You could put it at 2.7, obviously, you know, the option's there, but if you was to give it the cannon pods, you would have to stick it at 3.0 just like the tank, because, you know, we don't exactly want people running around as Stukas going at full fighter mode. So, yeah. But I thought that was a pretty safe pick. Obviously, Harry suggested the prototype BF-110. Looked into that. Yeah, you could. It's a bit more general purpose. But I found the bomb... Like, I couldn't find anything on the bomb load for that. And I also couldn't find anything in terms of, like, you know, how much armor it had, how much it weighed, its performance and stuff like that. So I couldn't find too much on that. The sources that I found were very shaky. So I didn't want to trust that one. And I just went with the D4 because it was the safer option. Moving on to Russia, we have the replacement tank T-28 F-34. Battle rating 3.0. Now, I think that can definitely be changed, but obviously this thing has no armor for that BR, so, you know. That's my reasoning for that. Obviously, you know, the T-126 gets slaughtered these days, because even though the T-126 would have much better armor than the T-28 F-34, its firepower is woefully inadequate, given its 3.0 battle rating. And the T-28 F-34 would trade armor for mobility and firepower. This packs the F-34 cannon of the 1941 and 1942 T-34s without having armor but still having 6 crew to be more forgiving than most starter vehicles. Obviously, I've really struggled with Russia because, you know, it's one of those nations that just... It kind of lacked in, like, what would suit a starter pack, so to speak. You know, like, there was a lot that could necessarily go wrong if I picked a wrong vehicle. Obviously, I had the idea to do the T-476, which was it wasn't even built, so already it was out of the question. But, you know, I looked into it still. And it was basically a Panzer IV F1 proposed to swap out the gun and put this gun in it, the F-34. And then I thought, well, I know for a fact there was a T-28 variant with a 57. That's a bit too much. Is there a different one? And sure enough, there was. There was the F-34. Now, I'm going to say straight away, before anyone points it out, because you've probably already noticed it. If you haven't, I'll point it out for you. That cannon is photoshopped on there. It's one of the few images I could actually find of this vehicle. There is one that, has a proper image of this cannon, but it's quite hard to see because the tank is such an awkward angle, and I thought I'd see if anyone noticed it, to be honest, and, that is photoshopped on there by someone, but there is a true image of this vehicle on Google and other sources that have this, but I want to leave it in for a bit of comedic effect, that everything like that. Obviously, this thing wouldn't have much armor. It would be 30mm at most, and obviously still have the big engine to obviously propel this thing quite along fast. But it will still have the punch of the F-34 cannon, which, it can still do that. And as you can see by looking at the front of the vehicle, it still has the machine gun ports, well, the machine gun turrets. So not only would you have the additional armor of those, but the extra machine guns can actually make a difference, and they actually do elevate quite high. Then, of course, the replacement aircraft, the BSH-2. This is an IL-2 prototype. That's why I put it in brackets, because that's a designation for it. There is another designation, but this is the easiest one to fit on the slide. So this is an IL-2 prototype. If you looked at the plane immediately, you probably guessed that already. So my reasoning for this, giving a new player an I-153 is nice and all, but it really doesn't teach them anything. The only thing that a Chika teaches you is, oh my god, this plane is broken, and also very fragile, which you'll be surprised how many people have actually said that the I-153 is a bad aircraft in ground RB, and I agree with them. Yes, it can do very much in terms of ground attack, but the moment those wings start taking hits, it snaps like a twig. So the BSH-2 prototype would give them a chance to learn ground attack and soft target engagement. Now, its guns and bomb load are lower than the standard IL-2, given it's only armed with 7.62s all across the board, and its bomb load is only 400 kilograms. But, unlike most early IL-2s, it actually does have a tail gun. I don't know if you can see it here on the actual image. It's quite hard to tell because of the, 1930s and stuff. But there is a glass housing with a machine gun turret, specifically a Shakass machine gun. So not only is it it's an IL-2, but it gets a tail gun, and at the BR I'm proposing, 2.7, whilst it wouldn't have the frontal firepower of a standard IL-2, 4 Shakass will be more than enough for it at 2.7. The 400 kilograms of bomb load is a little bit low, but trust me, there was not much for Russia. There was a few other options that I could have gone for, like another Yak variant carrying bombs and stuff like that, but that's more of a fighter than it is a strike aircraft, so that kind of defeats rule, I think it was 3. There's a lot to consider, and at the same time, I don't want to be, giving them something that is blatantly overpowered just because it's Russia. The T-28 obviously would have a lot of firepower going for it, but it trades that for its armor, and obviously, as we know, T-28s are kind of tinderboxes, and, if you hit the T-28 in the right spot, you one-shot it anyway, so, it's not like it would be breaking anything, but you get my point, this sort of wombo combo would work pretty well. Now, the only problem with the BSH-2, other than its guns, is the engine. This is the earlier engine, so it does have a little less power. To be honest, IL-2s don't really care about that, but you would probably feel a bit of horsepower difference. But at the same time, it's a prototype. You can only give it so much legroom, and it's lugging a tail gun. So, it's what, and also it's still got the same armor as a standard IL-2 as well. It's a little bit different from that, but, this is no excuse for Gaijin. This would be really, really easy for them to implement itself. Then we're moving on to Britain, and Britain was actually a bit of a thorn in my ass because, well, I've had to sort of go unique for Britain for the tank, but for the plane, I haven't, and I'll explain my reasoning in a moment. So, the replacement tank is the A-13 Mark III Covenanter, battle rating 2.3. Now, I know every single British main is going to be screaming at me for saying, Joe, why didn't you why didn't you make this as a tech tree vehicle? Yada, yada, yada. Yeah, they can still do that. That's not why it's here. The reason why the Covenanter is here is because there really isn't much you can do. And mainly due to that is because just how many variants of British vehicles we already have. And obviously, you've got to consider new players. Like, are new players going to enjoy it? Obviously, in the case of the Covenanter, that turret is from the Crusader, so the 2-pounder. At 2.3, this will be more than adequate. But also, there's not a lot for them to model here. They'd have to obviously modify the hull a little bit, because obviously it is a slightly upgraded, Crusader and everything. But obviously the front area is going to be the hardest to model, because that's where the radiator was. And, it is still, somewhat unique, and that's what I tried to go for. But at the same time, the turret is familiar territory. Obviously, it is, it's still a Crusader at heart, technically speaking. The 2-pounder is more than adequate for 2.3. And, it's not as well survivable as a Crusader Mark II. It has one less crew member. Because obviously there would be a machine gun turret, but obviously that's where the cooling is for the engine. And, it gives us a chance to have the Covenanter both in the premium line and in the tech tree, which, I'll be honest, I've kind of wanted the Covenanter for quite some time. And, well, it's a unique little tank to an extent. And, it's something that us British mains would love to see, I'm sure. Then for the aircraft, you'll be surprised when I explain why this specific image is a model. You'll be surprised, because this was actually a nightmare to find. So the replacement aircraft here is the Hurricane Mark II-D, battle rating 2.0. So the reasoning for this is having a non-cannon armed Spitfire with no CAS options is criminal. And the Mark II-D Hurricane would be an easy way to solve this. Why not the Mark IV? Never got fitted with the Rolls-Royce 40mm cannons, which in some early versions of the 2D, it did have. I did find an image of those cannons, but it's on a model, as you can see there. It would have a faster fire rate for new players, but also teach trigger discipline. That and another Hurricane in game never hurts us, as this one can replace the cannons for bombs and rockets. And if you look very carefully on this wing, obviously there is one on the other side, but it's not been modelled on the actual model itself, you can see the marking machine gun. This was common on the Hurricanes that had these cannons. You'd use the machine guns to line up the cannons, and then you'd fire the cannons onto the target. The Hurricane Mark IV has the exact same setup. So literally all Gaijin would have to do is swap the cannons for the Rolls-Royce ones and just lighten the armour a little bit, and then jobs are good, and there's a Mark II-D. That is literally all they have to do. Me and Sikogna spent quite a lot of time trying to find that aircraft with the specific cannons I was looking for, because obviously we wanted the Rolls-Royce 40mm. I found several documents saying that existed. I found several sources indicating that it existed. But at the same time, I couldn't find an image, and then I found this model here, and well, it does the job. So there you go. But yeah, like the Rolls-Royce cannon is grossly underestimated in game, because obviously a lot of the time, early British aircraft used the Vickers S, which is the one we went with in the end for those that are curious. But the Rolls-Royce 40mm was still fitted to Mark IIs. It was not fitted to Mark IVs. So that's why I kind of wanted to give that cannon a bit more representation in game. Moving on to Japan, and I must admit, Japan's tank took me an hour of searching. And for the replacement tank, we have the Chi-Nu prototype with the Type 90 gun, battle rating 3.3. So, I know some of you are going to be thinking, hold on a minute, Joe, that literally looks no different to the Chi-Nu we have in game. And that's where you're technically wrong, but you're also not. The gun on this is very slightly different. I believe this is the gun from the Honi 1. The one that the Chi-Nu has is from the Honi 3. So there is technically a difference. Not much, because the penetration doesn't really change. But, the armor doesn't change as well. The machine guns don't change. Obviously, it's still got a machine gun on the roof, as you can see on the top. But, Japan's early tiers are kind of lacking and also suffer down. And also the vehicle lineups are not really existent. In terms of gameplay, this is like the one in the tree, but no muzzle brake. So technically it's a little harder to barrel it. And also it would bolster and create room for a good 3.3, 3.7 lineup for Japan. The Chi-Nu is a decent tank. It's not the best tank. But I think giving them something that has, good penetration, reasonable mobility, and, great shells as well, because the shells are great, it's just the penetration's a bit low. But you know what I mean, like, this is a vehicle that I can comfortably say, yeah, this will do the job. And even though it's a prototype, obviously this is Chi-Nu at the end of the day, it was built and the regular one is still around today, the prototype isn't. This is the only image I could find of the Chi-Nu prototype. I actually had to find this from the War Thunder forums because that's the only place I could find it. And this is the only surviving image of the Type 90 gun on a Chi Nu. So, there you go. And then for the replacement aircraft, we have the D4Y4 Judy. Early, specifically. You'll see that I'm adding on as we get down to Italy as well, because I think Italy's next, is it? Or is it French? I don't remember, because it's first thing in the morning, my brain's a bit fried. Obviously, the early designation is important here, because, well, I'll explain. So, about rate 3.0, this is pretty much a D4Y3 Co, but it is slightly different. So, this is a much improvement over the non-bomb armed Ki-44. For obviously ground attack. Obviously, as a fighter, the Ki-44 is arguably better, but you get my point. It carries a singular 800kg bomb and retains the machine guns of the D4Y3. So it can still defend itself to an extent. Also, still has great performance and agility. However, this is the only variant that I could find that is unique that doesn't have a tail gunner. So, rear defense, not like Japanese aircraft are hugely known for it, is non-existent. Now, the reason why the early tag is there is because this is a kamikaze variant of the D4Y. That's why the 800kg bomb doesn't even fit in the bomb bay, as you can see there by that image. And the reason for the rear gun being removed is because, well, it's going to be crashing into a ship. It doesn't exactly need a rear gun. But the reason for the early designation is because in the later models, the machine guns were removed. So the early tag is important here. Obviously, you know, as I said, there's going to be a late tag coming later in the video. Obviously, I know Sakogna's already jumped ahead. And if he hasn't, hello Sakogna, I still know you're here. But you know what I mean? Like, it's one of those that, like, the tag is important. Because obviously we have early designations in game. You know, we have the J9, we have the... What's another designation? There used to be the Hurricane that had the designation late. You know, like, there's still reasoning to add this designation, and I think this would be a pretty fair one. And obviously, as we know, the Japanese 800kg bomb is pretty dang good, so they have no excuse. And all they'd have to do is just remove the armor of the D4Y3, remove the tail gun, put an 800 in the bomb bay, and jobs you good in. It's China next. I can't remember what nation was next, to be honest. I never remember them in order, to be honest. So for China, I actually debated not changing the tank. And the reason why I did is because, well, I've already used Stuart right at the start of this video. Don't really, obviously, if you haven't watched that part, go back and watch the US part, because I do mention the M3A3. Now, the reason for the change is because this is the Chihakai Gongchen tank, probably butchered that part, at 2.3. Now, the reasoning for this is, whilst the M3A Stuart is a fantastic tank, as we've seen with the China starter pack gameplay, you know, I think this would be a bit more relevant to have, you know, because from what I've read, this thing actually has quite the story behind it. So from what I've read, it was where communist forces were engaged in Japan, or Japanese forces, and they basically sabotaged any vehicles they had left, and this was not one of them. So they didn't sabotage the Chihakai and, like, you know, damage it and stuff like that to stop it from being usable. Then they captured it, the communist forces captured it, and this is still around today in a museum with that little Chinese star on it, and obviously the decals on the side of the tank. I think, personally, you know, as someone who prefers a story to some extent for a vehicle, you know, I would prefer to have this. Yes, the Chihakai is worse than the Stuart in a few areas. You know, like, it doesn't have the... I'm going to be quite embarrassed saying this. It doesn't have the armor protection. Its mobility is worse. The gun does lower in penetration, but at the same time, the Chihakai gets high explosive rounds, which you'll be surprised how beneficial that is. At least I think it does. I think it gets high explosive rounds. I don't remember. It should have high explosive rounds, though. It gets APHE rounds, which, you know, they are pretty potent, and they do pack a decent punch. And at 2.3, you get more of a generous lineup. So, there you go. And like I said, because it has a story behind it, I think just because of that, it has more reasoning, you know, to be added as part of the starter pack. And plus, I'm sure some of the Chinese players would appreciate this. As for the replacement aircraft, we have the Ki-45 High. Excuse me, I had a bit of a burp then. Battle rating 2.3. And I'm going to be honest with you, this is copium. Why is it copium, Joe? Well, short answer is we already have the Kai 45 high tie in the premium line. My proposal is to simply remove the tie part and call it a day as a separate vehicle. Now, the reasoning why that doesn't work, technically speaking, is because from what I've been able to source, they captured 3 Kai 45s and rebuilt one of them using parts from all 3. Now, you could say, yeah, they could leave the cannons that don't, the Schrag music cannons, they could leave those off. Fair enough, I agree with that, and that's kind of why I've done it. Obviously, the tail gun's not present on this this picture here. I didn't add it in because I took a regular Kai 45 and just scribbled off the just scribbled off the 20s on the top. But like I said, this is pretty much copium for me. The only option other than this was a Tu-2 prototype sort of aircraft. I say prototype, it wasn't really a prototype, but it was like a bomber trainer sort of thing. With 400 kilograms of bombs, it was twin-engined, very large, and it only had a single 50 cal, which was in the back with like 150 rounds for defense. That's not really what I want to give to a new player. So I know Harry's going to be fuming at the fact that there's another Kai 45, but given the rules and everything, this is the only thing I can propose. So sorry, Harry. And now, I'm sure Sikogna's already jumped ahead here just to see this at the start of the video, but if he hasn't, well done mate, you took more temptation than I thought. And the replacement tank for Italy will be the M1542 Late. There's a reason why the designation is there, and I'll explain in a moment. At BR 2.7. So as we all know, if you've not watched the channel before, or the M14, 41, 47, 40 videos, I despise the thing. It's sluggish, it's slow, the gun is poor, and while you may think the M1542 doesn't solve that, well actually it does. First of all, the engine is upgraded, so it's a lot more nimble. The armor, whilst it isn't really upgraded, it is upgraded. And the new shell, Proietto Contocelli Effetto Pronto Speciale, try saying that 5 times fast, this tank will have a much better time thanks to an upgraded shell, borderline Hesh heat shells. So I haven't been able to find anything on penetration for these shells, but essentially this little 47mm was able to fire a borderline Hesh round and a heat shell. Now again, if you have any sources on how the penetration was, at least, on average and everything, because obviously heat rounds tend to be penetration across all ranges, do leave them in the comments, because I literally couldn't find anything. But you could also give these shells to the M14, 41, 47, 40, and whilst the tank would still be shit because of how slow it is, it would at least be able to pen pretty much anything it meets. So, it's something like that. But yeah. As for replacement aircraft, we do have the Oro 57 Biz at BR 2.3. This is a solid aircraft for ground attack, 2 Bredder 1,000 kilograms of bomb load, die brakes, you name it. And whilst it doesn't have a rear gunner or much engine power, it's decently agile and will get bombs onto target to support after the M15 is destroyed. And of course, unlike the Oro 2001 in the starter pack currently, it can actually bomb stuff. So yeah, as you can tell, I really do not like the Italian starter pack, and it's quite a shame that it did such a half-assed job of it. And, well, if I could do this, because this presentation took me about 6 hours to, do all research and stuff, and then, add everything in and all like that, like information and stuff like that, that is kind of a shame, because Gaijin should really know better. And I think an M1542 Late would fix a lot of issues with it. Yes, the armor is still poor. Yes, the gun, if you're not using the upgraded shells, would be bad still. But at the same time, Italy doesn't have a lot. And I could go easy mode and just put in the P40 prototype, but that would mean we have 2 premium P40s. And to be honest, I don't think anyone wants that. And, this is still a good tank playing combo, and, it would still provide something. And plus, me and Harry want the RF-57 Biz in-game, so, this is the easiest way to add it. And like I said, you can also add the M1542 Late as a tech tree vehicle. You can obviously do a, there's a decal on the side of the turret of this M15 that I found from War Thunder itself. You can maybe put that in, I guess, and just put it as a tech tree vehicle, and then put the premium one as a, like a first tank brigade or something. I don't know, but like I said, I really want Italy's starter pack to be improved, and I think this is the best way to do it. Moving on to the French. Now, the French was a little bit more tricky, but I'll explain why. So, the French was pretty tricky because all of the options that I considered were, well, they weren't very good. So, for example, I considered the B1 Biz prototype, which had it had a 47 in the hull, quite a high velocity 47, which, that would be something. But it was pretty much fixed forward firing. And the top turret was from the AMC 34YR. Now, it had 40 millimeters of armor from what I've read, and, it could, do something with that. But I'd rather not risk it. And I'd rather go with something that is not only unique, but, well, to an extent, but also something that I'm sure everyone would like. So I've gone with the Panhard 178B, and I've just put in brackets because that's how it would be probably classified in game, AMD 35B, at battle rating 2.3. So the reasoning: most French tanks are ass, no polite way to put it. This will provide good firepower and good mobility to an extent, and, it's got a decent enough gun, and also active scouting, which is the third vehicle in this proposal that could scout. Obviously, we've had the Stuart, we've had, other vehicles and things like that. There have been vehicles that can scout. And the SA-35 cannon provides more than enough for most situations and flanking opportunities. Obviously, the Covenanter could also scout and everything. Now, obviously, it is still a Panhard armoured car, so it is not very well armoured, but its mobility is the highest out of all vehicles featured in this video. And most importantly, the SA-35 cannon, whilst it does have pretty low penetration compared to other 2.3 vehicles, the fact is this vehicle does at least, it has a coax, unlike that really terrible, I think it's, I can't remember the name of it, but there's a really bad AMD 35 Premium. I have it, I don't remember the name of it, I've driven it a handful of times, it's awful. But this actually gets a coaxial machine gun, so, it at least has a bit of extra benefit. But obviously the turret is a bit of a mishmash, it looks terrible, but it will do. And like I said, the AMD 35 is a proven chassis, like most players like it in game. So, it pretty much works for that. And then the replacement aircraft is the MB-175, which is slightly different from the 174 in game. Now, I've had to put it at 2.3, and I think the M174 could go to 2.3. Reasoning for that is because whilst it does lack firepower to the P40 that's available, this does step up the bomb load by a decent margin. Able to carry internal 100 and 200 kilogram bombs, as well as the external 500 kilogram bomb. Great cast, and is also quite agile for its size. Also has frontal armament because it has two 7.5s in the wing roots for engaging soft targets and also aircraft. Otherwise, it's pretty much a 174. Like, there's not much they need to do, just slightly internal modelling of the bomb load and stuff like that. Again, Gaijin, you have no excuse, and please drop the 174's BR. I love that plane. It's very underrated, but please drop its BR. It is not worthy of 2.7. But no, this one was quite interesting because I know for a fact that Tasty Bread wanted this plane. And like I said, you could do a 175 prototype as the, the premium vehicle, and then you can do a later model as the, you can do that as a tech tree vehicle. That's sort of my reasoning for this. And like I said, it's a very good aircraft. I use the 174 sometimes in Lotte France. And it's very effective. It's got decent bomb load. It's decently agile. The ray guns surprisingly do quite well. So yeah, and like I say, you've still got the, I don't know if you can see it down here, you can still see the machine guns down there. So, you at least have that. And finally, we have the Swedish, which this was not difficult at all. It's just the plane was a little bit of a nightmare. And the tank is the Stridsvagn M40K, battle rating 2.3. Now, this may not look like much of an upgrade compared to the Stridsvagn M40L, but it has increased armor compared to the M40L on the turret with a new engine, gearbox, and suspension. It would still have the same issue as the Stridsvagn M41 with its gun, but with a lower BR and a smaller profile, this should be just as good. So this could still fire the saber round, same as the M40L. Its armor was not two separate plates, it was just 50 millimeters of armor. So, it still has something. But the turret armor was obviously improved. It still keeps the twin coaxial machine guns, so it still has a lot of effective against trucks and things like that. And obviously, it still has the same APHE rounds as the Stridsvagen M40L. But obviously, this would still have the issue of the the M41, but at the same time, it's smaller, it's more nimble, and obviously, its turret armor is better from what I've been able to read. And to be honest, this would be just the best suited vehicle for it, because again, Sweden didn't have a lot in terms of domestic production, and as you'll see with the plane, which I'm about to talk about now, you'll see why I had to include the strike aircraft based off of fighters rule, and also that applies to the Hurricane. But anyway, replacement aircraft. This is the Seversky B6 at battle rating 2.3. Now this may look a bit odd to you, and some of you may be seen as unique by the folks at home. But believe it or not, this is a two-seat version of the Seversky P35. I'm going to let that sink in a minute. I must admit, when I looked at it, I could see the reasoning, and I could see the angle of it. But then I was like, what the hell? Okay, this actually makes sense. So, obviously it had 3 8mm machine guns and had a bomb load equivalent to the B-17, I think it's the A, equivalent in the tree. And thanks to its fighter-like agility, this will be able to handle itself quite well. And since we have the J9 early in game, which is basically a P35, well, a Seversky P35, they really have very little excuse. So obviously the firepower would be lacking compared to that, and obviously there was a rear gun on this thing, so just bear that in mind. There was a rear gun. It was sat around about here, and obviously, as I said, it does have the bomb load of a B-17A. So not only is it more nimble than that, but also it has well, it doesn't have firepower, but it does have 2 8mm machine guns, which would be very nice for them to have. And like I said, they have very little excuse to include this, because it is one of the more unique vehicles in this proposal, and to be honest, I think it's just one that they could include. And well, since there's no Israeli starter pack, that's it for today, so thank you all for watching if you have made it this far. And yeah, I've really enjoyed this one, as you already know from previous proposals, and if you don't know because you're new to the channel, I do love making these. The hardest part was finding a Japanese tank, as well as a Chinese aircraft, and the French tank was also a little bit hard to do. Ultimately, it took me a full evening to complete this project, obviously with the help of Elsa Cogna / Blue Gold. As usual, Gaijin probably won't give a monkeys about my proposals since they don't take notice of a small content creator, so if you have made it this far, drop a sub and share the video, and obviously if you want to use this on the forums, please do so. That's the end of this video for today. I really hope you enjoyed seeing the vehicles that I come up with for this proposal, as well as appreciate the time I put into this. And well, thank you all for watching, as I say again, and I'll see you all on the next one.